Last weekend was Uvalde, Texas. 21 people dead. Before that, Buffalo, New York. 10 people killed there. Both of the alleged shooters, 18. Part of a growing trend in recent years. Think about this. 6 of the 9 deadliest mass shootings in U.S. history since 2018 were by people who were 21 or younger.
The latest in the racist supermarket shooting in Buffalo, the 18-year-old suspect accused of killing 10 people.
When Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold hunted down and killed 12 students. This 16-year-old Tampa student was also allegedly planning a murderous nightmare, but who at 14 was arrested for allegedly discussing a plan to attack his high school outside of Philadelphia.
Mass shootings, as you probably already know, are a common reoccurrence in the United States. We ended 2021 with 692 mass shootings. The year before that, we saw 610. And in 2019, we had 417 mass shootings. And we're not talking about gang violence and gang shootings in this video. What we will define as a mass shooting for the purpose of this video is the shooter's goal is to kill as many people as possible, with the incentive being that alone. The shooter doesn't necessarily know all of the victims or intended victims personally. The shooter has little to no escape plan, and the shooter targets crowded places with low defensibility. These massacres don't come out of nowhere. This is planned violence. There is, in every one of these cases, always a trail of behavioral warning signs and a common thread between all of these mass shootings. So this video might be a little controversial, but I think it's important. The intended purpose of this video is to explore why we see a growing trend in white teenagers shooting up their communities. And I think that in order to do that, we need to widen our scope a little bit and take a look at the overall community as a whole. Ever wonder why white Americans seem overrepresented in perpetuating random mass shootings? It's because white American culture is a lot more splintered, and there's no falling back on members of your ethnic group. People of color in America often have enclaves. What do white Americans have that can make them a community? It used to be that mass shooters were middle-aged men, like James Huberty or George Hennard or Pat Sherrill. But now, mass shooters are getting younger and younger, with 18 to 21 being an extremely common age range. Much like young, disaffected men everywhere, some of them choose to turn to fringe ideologies that encourage violence as a mean of proving oneself. Most mainstream fringe hate groups in America, like the White Aryan Resistance, preach against racial, religious, and sexual minorities. These groups have hotlines, internet websites, and chat rooms, and distribute propaganda designed to transform the fears of the economically challenged, the paranoid, and the ignorant into violence, and to brutalize minorities. And these young, alienated teenagers who rely on the information that they get from being glued to the internet with very little physical or social interaction are being served to these groups on a silver platter. On Saturday, May 15th, 2022, Peyton Gendron, a man from Conklin, New York, fatally shot 10 people at the Top supermarket in Buffalo, New York. He had driven hours from his home with one intent. He wanted to find a place where he could slaughter people, black people. 11 of the 13 people shot by Peyton were black. Among the victims were grandmothers grocery shopping and a former police officer who tried to stop the gunman. Peyton was an 18-year-old white man. Dylan Roof was convicted and sentenced to death for the 2015 slayings of 9 members of a black South Carolina church congregation. He opened fire on the room with a semi-automatic pistol, killing 9 people. Dylan self-identifies as an American white supremacist neo-Nazi and is considered a domestic terrorist. He was 22 at the time. Patrick Crucius walked into a store with a semi-automatic rifle, firing off shots and killing 23 people, wounding another 26. Patrick was said to have extreme anti-Latino and anti-immigrant sentiments and target his attacks specifically at those groups.
The shooter describes himself as a white nationalist, a right-wing extremist consumed by conspiracy theories. In short, he thinks that white people are being replaced by immigrants in this country.
The need to belong to a group or tribe is one of the biggest instinctual drives humans have. In the prehistoric days, humans could not survive the harsh elements without a tribe, and abandonment meant death. The sociologist Robert Putnam talks about the erosion of American community in his book, Bowling Alone. In his book, Putnam discussed the ways in which Americans disengage from political involvement, including decreased voter turnout, attendance at public meetings, service on committees, and work with political parties. His insights also pointed out the growing distrust between Americans and the government. Putnam noted the aggregate loss in membership and existing number of volunteers in many existing civic organizations. Putnam used bowling as an example to illustrate this. Although the number of people who bowled had increased in the last 20 years, the number of people who bowled in leagues had actually decreased. If people bowled alone, they did not participate in the social interaction and civic discussions that might occur in a league environment. But it's not just bowling. Sociologists have cited a decrease in all kinds of organizations, from fraternities to parent-teacher associations. Neighborhoods with higher levels of civic participation have a greater sense of community, lower levels of crime, and citizens who are healthier and happier. States and countries with greater proportions of civically engaged citizens have lower rates of disease, mental illness, and suicide. With declining levels of civic engagement and group involvement, people become self-absorbed and depressed. This is especially true for young adults. They also aren't gaining the experience they need to become more well-rounded. You see where I'm going here? Nobody wants to join the Boy Scouts, the bowling league is in shambles, and now Timmy is pissed. So what? Who cares? People aren't meeting each other in social groups anymore and having meaningful conversations. Robert Putnam, that guy, he can bowl alone for the rest of his life. Surely the kids of America are gaining healthy social skills by interacting with people in their day-to-day lives, right? Modern societal technology seeks to serve the individual. You used to listen to music by going to concerts, going to the store to buy vinyl, or listening to the radio with your family. I don't mean to sound like a boomer, but it's true. Now you put your headphones in and listen to music yourself. When you get on the bus, everyone else is staring at their phones or listening to their headphones. Basic transactions have become less human. It used to be that you needed to call someone to make a food order and get it from a delivery person that you had to physically tip. But now you can order food on an app and choose contactless delivery. No social interaction required. Work has also become less human. Now people can work from home. The distance between the CEO or boss of a company and the ordinary worker has widened dramatically.
Buell School, please allow me to add some insight into this video.
Go ahead, Buellbot. Take it away.
Technology is virtually in every home in one way or another. About 96% of Americans have a TV and 94% of children ages 3 to 18 have internet access either through a computer or smartphone. Developing social skills takes practice, and if technology is often in the way, there are fewer opportunities for kids to develop these skills. Technology can potentially influence the child's developing brain and problem-solving skills. For instance, the child might be reliant on a device to solve problems for them rather than using brain connections to work through a problem and find a solution. With so much information available on the internet, it's difficult for parents to monitor what their children are exposed to, including inappropriate content or interactions with strangers. The kids who committed the mass shootings we spoke about earlier would often find those fringe hate groups while browsing the internet unmonitored. Social media is also full of graphic images showing violence and death, which desensitizes the younger generation and makes them less adverse to violent behavior. Video games have a similar effect on the mind of a child as it relates to desensitizing their sensitivities to violent behavior. Games such as Grand Theft Auto give kids the opportunity to become virtual mass shooters, with dopamine being released into their brains every time they leave behind a digital casualty. The internet and advancing technology definitely plays a partial role in the upward trend of young mass shooters.
White people in the United States have historically had disproportionate access to firearms. The real-life availability of firearms, including those most lethal, are still greater among white populations, manifesting in the number of perpetrators in these shootings. Gun laws have gotten stricter over the years, yet somehow mass shootings have increased, and the average age of mass shooters has plummeted. Many of these mass shooters are suicidal young men that don't want to die feeling like they didn't make an impact on the world. But without a strong sense of community ties, it's hard to feel like you matter and that you're valued. This is especially true for teen boys, where societal expectations of masculinity encourage them to be strong, confident, and getters of women. But in today's society, a lot of young men don't measure up to those standards. They're physically weak from staying home all day. They're awkward from spending all their time online. They can't get girls to date them. This is also why incels have exploded as a movement over the past few years. Hey, Buellbot, do me a favor, help me out with this a little bit?
Sure thing, Buell School. You can't speak about incel violence without talking about Trace Jenko. Jenko was from Hillsboro, Ohio and was a 21-year-old man who rarely ever had any success with women. He plotted to shoot students in sororities at a local Ohio university. He was arrested by federal agents before the attack. Jenko identified as an incel, or involuntary celibate. The incel movement is an online community of predominantly men who harbor anger towards women. Incels seek to commit violence in support of their belief that women unjustly deny them sexual or romantic attention to which they believe they are entitled. They share a burning sense of misogyny and a nearly cult-like belief that sex is a necessity that should be guaranteed to young men. These ideas have manifested, at times, into attacks and mass casualty events.
Overnight, a newly released investigators report from the Florida Department of Children and Families, filed just days after that 2016 fight, noted Cruz' behavior changes due to a recent breakup. The investigator St. Cruz talked about wanting to purchase a gun and feeling depressed.
Most incels aren't even ugly. They're just socially awkward and isolated from everyone around them, so they seek an ideology that shifts the blame onto women.
Even though the shooter was a man, even though most mass shooters in this country are men, white men, Tucker Carlson found a way to blame women.
And yet the authorities in their lives, mostly women, never stops lecturing them about their so-called privilege. You're male, you're privileged. Imagine that. Try to imagine an unhealthier, unhappier life than that.
Behaviors that wokesters may deride as toxic masculinity are just reminders of the times before the industrial society, when life was much harsher and men were judged on their ability to provide and protect.
When these young men don't measure up to the classic image of what masculinity entails, they begin to get bullied by their peers, who see them as weak and wounded prey in the social playing field. Rather than working toward constructive solutions when they feel they have fallen short, these men turn their rage outward as a recourse. The young men exert their masculinity by engaging in these massive acts of violence. Almost half of those who perpetrated K-12 shootings reported a history of rejection from women, with many experiencing bullying for their peers. In a chilling 60 Minutes interview, school shooter Evan Ramsey talks about what drove him to carry out the Bethel Regional High School shooting in 1997, when he was 16 years old.
I got tired of being picked on, and I decided that, man, I gotta do something. I need to stand up for myself, and I threw the duffel bag that I used as my locker against the wall, and it caused the gun case to rattle, and I decided that I was going to take the shotgun to school.
The father of the teen accused of killing 10 people at a Texas high school says he believes bullying drove him to open fire on his classmates.
In one video, the shooter says that right now he is nothing, that his life is meaningless, but only vaguely hints at his motive.
I had enough of telling me that I'm an idiot and a dumbass.
Some young men get into radical online movements. Some young men OD on fentanyl. Other young men shoot up a workplace, a supermarket, or a parade. If one feels like they do not belong, that pushes them into antisocial acts. I'm in no way justifying or making excuses for these random acts of violence. I absolutely don't condone it. I'm merely just trying to give you some insight as to what the thought pattern may be. The one thing all these mass shooters had in common was that they were young men who felt the world had left them behind. As the proverb goes, a child that is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And sometimes it's not even about a child being embraced by the village. Sometimes there's no village to begin with. The point of this video wasn't to be divisive or to sow seeds of divides. In making this video, I had a lot of time to think about it, and truthfully, it doesn't even really matter whether the shooter is white, black, Indian, Asian. It really doesn't matter. It's a national crisis. It's a huge problem. It's something that we have to work on, and the only way we're going to be able to work on it is if we work on it together. So, that's just my little tidbit. Sorry if this video offended anybody. If it makes you feel any better, black people do most of the gang shootings in America. You know, if you feel like I was being one-sided, there's a point for you, I guess. I also want to express my sincere condolences to anybody who has been a victim of one of these shootings or has friends or family that has been a victim of these shootings. It's absolutely terrifying and horrific, and I feel for you. I won't send thoughts and prayers because I think you've had enough of those. Anyway, thanks for watching. I worked really, really hard on this video. It took me about 3 weeks to make, so I really, really, really appreciate you watching. Hope to see you again. Thanks.
Hey Buell School, you forgot about me, the Buell bot. I used to be the main voice of this channel, and now I barely get any screen time. I hope you guys like Buell School's stupid voice. I think he sounds like a Caucasian. In the comments, please tell me whose narration you prefer. And if you have any suggestions for videos you want us to cover, let us know that too. Thanks again for your support.